Look, what Hamas did on October 7 was barbaric, was a genocide motivated by sick religion. They attempted to ethnically cleanse uh, a race, a human race. And this is a capital crime that cannot be forgiven. The situation to legitimize such a movement, give them legitimacy, and after that, in fact, to sit down on the negotiating table, then reward them with a state and political gain and financial gain. This is exactly what they wanted. Hamas, on October 7 in the morning, they killed Jewish children for revenge. In the afternoon, they killed Arab children, their own children. And by the way, this is a Palestinian practice to sacrifice their own children for political and financial gain. This is the essence of their game.
This is the thing. The push by the UN, by Ireland, Norway and Spain, pushing for the recognition of a Palestinian state. In years prior, I might have been behind the idea, but after October the 7th, the idea that's being pushed for now feels sickening, because it feels like it's sending a message of rewarding October the 7th, rewarding the Palestinians with a state after they've done nothing to demonstrate they're worthy of statehood, and done everything to demonstrate that they're just an evil, savage entity, a savage, murderous, criminal entity, and that their methods work in getting them what they want. It's the most sickening thing I've ever heard of, and worse, if it encourages that view, that it encourages the Palestinians to think that they don't have to cooperate with Israel in any peace deal. It sabotages the peace deal. It renders the premises of a peace deal, of mutual agreements, null and void. That's why I'm sickened by the idea of a push for a Palestinian state, and why I think it should be resisted at all costs at this point. And I normally wouldn't be of that mind. Like years before, I wouldn't have been. Prior to October the 7th, I wouldn't have been. I mean, I would have assumed that maybe that security concerns would have to be debated, but if it was possible to give the Palestinians take the pressure off the Palestinians in the West Bank, then that could only be a good thing. But we now know that if the West Bank were able to enact an October the 7th massacre, then they have far more of a tactical advantage to do so. Like I said, it was claimed in the 1967 war by Israel because it had tactical advantages as a land, and all those tactical advantages would belong to Fatah or whatever Palestinian terrorist group emerged from that. If Hamas emerged, because Hamas is present in the West Bank and they are incredibly popular. The only reason that they've not been elected into power is because the Palestinian Authority have not held elections in 18 years, because they know that Hamas would absolutely beat them in a landslide.
And I am a living example. If you look at me, when my father had to choose between his Hamas Palestinian ideology and his own son, he chose the non-existential. He chose Allah over his son. And this is a living example to show you how these people function. They are willing to sacrifice not only 40,000 Gazans, they are willing to sacrifice an entire region religiously for something that does not exist. So with that said, Israel has no choice. It's not only about the children and the civilians of Gaza. It's about also the future of an entire generation in the Middle East. And I don't think there is a way around eradicating Hamas and removing them from power. We may suffer right now, and the Gazans may suffer, but the future will be bright at least brighter without Hamas.
Yeah, I mean, he did this ode to children, and I agree. 34 kids were killed on October 7th. That's heartbreaking. 15,000 Palestinian children have been killed.
They killed every child they found on October 7. If they found 10,000 children, they would have killed 10,000 children.
Okay.
It is not about head count.
Okay, so I'm not excusing a single child that Hamas killed, but it seems like you're saying, 15,000 Palestinian kids. So what? Israel had to do it. We have to eradicate Hamas.
Don't put words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth. And don't think that you hold the higher moral ground.
I do.
Those are my children. Those are my brothers and my sisters. And you are not. Don't
You
pose
don't even
as
think
the
they
one you
exist.
care more.
So Cenk is being at once kind of a disingenuously kind of just being uncharitable in his reading of what Mosab is saying. He's not saying he delights in this. He's often said, look, war is the only way to peace. And as he described in his book, the reason he worked with the Israeli Secret Service wasn't to help them kill Palestinians. It was quite the opposite. It was to prevent radicalized Palestinians from blowing themselves up and indiscriminately killing Jews and Arabs and Druze, which would lead only to more reprisals from Israel. From the IDF would respond violently. He thought, look, if I can stop the suicide bombings, I can de-escalate this conflict as much as possible, but our leadership is making that impossible, whether it's Fatah or Hamas. And he knows that it's inevitable that after October the 7th, Israel is going to retaliate, and as he's often said, a more ruthless nation than Israel would have carpet-bombed Gaza. And so he has to be kind of grateful that Israel is benevolent enough to not completely carpet-bomb the Gaza in retaliation.
If we don't eradicate Hamas this war and this time, if we don't eradicate them, the next Gaza war is going to be deadlier. It's going to be much greater. If today we are complaining about 10,000 casualties, even though I'm not sure about the numbers because it's Hamas statistics, I don't trust anything they say or anything they do. But even if it was true, it's actually a miracle that we have only this number. The next war, we will be talking about hundreds of thousands. This is the 4th war with Hamas and the 5th war in Gaza, because also Islamic Jihad had their own war. If we don't eradicate Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza this time and give Gaza back to the people of Gaza, we will give them legitimacy. We will show them that we are afraid. And tomorrow, they will come back with vengeance. What made Hamas attack this time a lot stronger than the past wars? Because under the international pressure, we had to negotiate with them. And we had to give them legitimacy. This is what encouraged them and gave them power. If they insist on annihilating Israel, and of course, if Iran keeps on insisting on this goal, this means the destruction of the entire region. This is the only uncertain outcome of this, because Israel is going nowhere.
How do we get to peace from here?
You know, this time, I'm afraid that war is the only way to peace. Because if Hamas is not removed from power, then they will build more military. They will build longer range missiles. And the next attack, the next war is going to be deadlier. The use of force is the last resort. You can find this in every culture. And unfortunately, now Hamas left Israel and the free world as well with no choice but to fight them and put an end for their violence. Many civilians are dying, I understand this. Their blood is on the hands of Hamas, and Hamas only.
There's this whole thing about, demonizing the person presented the miserable truth and saying, "Oh, you just delight in the fact that that's the way it is," or it's Hamas that set this up, and much of the Palestinian pro-Palestine movement has been about vilifying everyone for the deaths of Palestinians except Hamas, vilifying everyone for being indifferent to the death of Palestinians except Hamas, who are clearly indifferent to the death of their own citizens. It's the most strange and chilling thing of all, really.
You don't care more than I do for the Palestinian children or for the Arab children.
All right.
The reason why are they suffering? This is the most important thing.
Mosab, and
You
Cenk,
don't mind that
Cenk,
Israel just murdered
one moment,
15,000 of
Cenk, I'm going to pull moderator prerogative moment. Let's just take a breath and take it down 10 degrees. I understand you're both riled because you both care about this.
Okay. So there is no need to take the higher moral ground. Here I speak on behalf of the Arab and the Jewish
Mosab,
children.
you've made your point.
They are
You've made your
very
point. You've made your
important to
point
me.
effectively and passionately.
I'm not being selective, and I don't need him to put words in my mouth.
15,000 children at a minimum are dead, and you're saying keep going.
Why? Why are they dead?
You're saying keep going.
Why are they dead?
So more children, thousands
Why
more
the
children.
children of Gaza are dead?
No,
Answer the question.
More children will be killed in future wars anyway if Hamas are not removed now. The objective is to remove Hamas from power because Hamas will continue to make peace impossible. October the 7th proved that they will continue to make peace impossible. A desirable peace seemed possible at that time. Or at least a Dayton seemed possible at that time. But after, it's clear that it will never be possible as long as Hamas are in power. And Hamas have sworn that they will do October the 7th again and again. They have pushed Israel to a point where it can't turn back. And so have Hezbollah, and so has Iran. They've all escalated their war operations to the point where Israel does have to fight multiple fronts, and it can't let any particular front fall. So you cannot be surprised that a lot of civilian collateral are dying in the ferocity of the war that is being amped up by every side, by every front. Because Israel has to kind of press on to finish off Hamas so that it can then turn its attention to having to take the fight to Hezbollah and the Houthis and Iran, which at the time of recording, Israel is taking the fight to Iran in a big major way. So when this video comes out, I don't know what the outcome will have been of it, but that's the point. Arguing, stop the bombing now. It's not really possible. Even if it were, it would just lead to a situation where Hamas starts the war again and the bombing would resume again. So he is saying, war is the only way to peace. The only way to end this is to end Hamas. You don't end Hamas by declaring a ceasefire.
More children, thousands
Why
more children.
the children of Gaza are dead? Answer the question.
So it's not because of the Israeli bombs, right? The Hamas made the Israelis kill the Palestinian children. It's always the Palestinians' fault. Always, right?
Yes. Hamas forced Israel's hand. It set the momentum of war into overdrive. It escalated it majorly. Deliberately. That's what Hamas did. It's what Hamas wanted to do. Is it the Palestinians' fault? Well, yeah, they supported Hamas. They voted Hamas into power. They refused to rise up and overthrow Hamas. They seemingly have no interest in overthrowing Hamas. And if they cared about their own children's well-being, why not? Why did they vote Hamas into power?
You said the Palestinians don't even exist, and you say that you were looking out for them. You were an Israeli spy, right?
I said Palestine does not exist. I did not say Arabs don't exist.
Okay, but you're claiming that you care about the Palestinians, but you were an Israeli spy. And you said your father sold you out. Didn't you sell out your dad? I'm not saying you shouldn't have. I get why you did it.
This is a fucking dick move from Cenk. Like I said, it's this bizarre thing on the left where they think that Mosab is somehow a sellout for refusing to cooperate with a jihadi death cult. He betrayed a jihadi death cult. He betrayed something barbaric. How kind of shameful. It's the most backward view I've ever known the left take. It's like, absolutely he should betray a death cult and work to stop its effect as best he can. You know, he acted to save lives, to prevent, like I said, to prevent the escalation of the conflict, to prevent the escalation of the bloodshed. That's why he worked with the Israeli Secret Service, to stop the suicide bombing. It was a mixture of things. There was disillusionment with Hamas, disillusionment with the Palestinian leadership in general, and the horror at witnessing the intifadas and the death toll, and realising that the only thing he could do, and also the fact that once working with the Israeli Secret Service, he realised that they were actually the more reasonable side, that you could have a reasonable discussion with them, and there wasn't the same impetus, tribalistic, furious impetus to, follow the blind leading the blind to this insane suicidal course of revenge. He realised that the best thing he could do was just to do his part to save as many lives as he could. And Cenk wants to vilify that as him being a traitor sellout. That's so sickening. And it also kind of, I think it shows up the bullshit of the left. That, they'll say that the Palestinians, they deserve their self-determination. They deserve their freedom. And yet when Mosab decides, his self-determination against the tribalism of Palestinian society, said, oh, that's the wrong kind of self-determination. You should follow your tribe. You should follow your tribe's self-determination to wage this insane suicide bombing campaign. You should do the stupid thing that your people are doing, rather than, have a mind of your own to do the smart thing. Yeah, fuck you, Cenk.
You shouldn't have. I get why you did it, but you sold him out. He didn't sell you out. You were the traitor.
So basically right now you're just going on a personal attack. Let me ask you this question.
No, because I'm addressing what you said.
I want to answer you.
Okay.
If you had information about a suicide bomber that is about to kill people indiscriminately, would you report them to the authorities?
I didn't blame you for what you did. I said
answer the question, yes or no. Would you report it?
Of course I would report a terrorist attack.
Would that make you a traitor?
Well, it depends on the situation. But when you
right.
said that your dad sold you out, that's just not true.
That is fucked up, that. It depends on the situation. No, it fucking doesn't. Okay. Suicide bombings that indiscriminately kill innocent civilians. There's no exceptions to the rule about when it's justified and not. Or rather, when it's right to take a stand about that or not. It's like, on a blanket level, yes, you should take a stand against that. Yes, you should, take whatever action you can to prevent it. Unless you're a fucking psychopath. And fuck you, Cenk, for saying, I didn't mean it as a personal attack. You fucking did.
I'm gonna step in again, because it has gotten personal. I understand you're both feeling it, and that's just not what we do here. We want to keep it on the points. So okay. I understand feelings have been hurt.
Yeah, but then I need to answer his question.
I want to move on from that question, because we're gonna keep going in that direction in circles. Fair enough.
But can I answer the?
No. I got to pull this and move on. Okay, very briefly, I want to go to a question that just comes out of the news, and it's the fact that Hamas has a new leader. Yahya Sinwar has taken over. He was the architect of the October 7th attacks, or certainly is given credit for that after the assassination.
Oh, I remember him. Yeah.
Of Hania. I just want to get your take on whether that changes in any way the dynamic for the possibility of any kind of negotiated settlement between Israel and Hamas, which you say have been saying is theoretically possible, you're saying is impossible, but does that change the calculation whatsoever?
See, this is why I don't think, well, it's not that I don't think that Israel wants peace, and we should distinguish between the people of Israel and the government of Israel. I believe the people of Israel do want peace. I think that they're greatly misguided these days about how to get there. They believe that just killing more Palestinians might get them there. It's never, ever going to get them to peace. It's going to get them to more war. But their government is very clear. And one of the ways that they have prevented peace is they just killed Ismail Haniyeh, who was the moderate within Hamas. Now you can say, oh, no, Hamas has no moderates. They're all Nazis.
A lot of people say that.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. But every movement has somebody who wants to get to peace, wants to do a negotiation, is more moderate relative to their movement, right? And Haniyeh was that guy. And Israel knew that. So they killed the moderate, leaving more extremists like Yahya Sinwar.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Israel. It's just, it's almost dirt stupid kind of ways to paint a conspiracy out of Israel. First of all, Israel is vilified for, missing the target and killing the civilians, killing civilian collateral in its attempt to get the target. But then when it gets the target, there's suddenly a Naksa surgical strike that kills the leadership of Hamas. Then suddenly Cenk's trying to say, suddenly is desperate to paint a conspiracy there. It's just this paranoid leftist, kind of this worldview that just kind of, that's just constantly performing mental gymnastics to justify itself. And that's what the left has been reduced to, it seems. But then was the left ever anything else, really? Israel's campaign is to end Hamas, so it's not even going to be that selective about who it kills or not in Hamas. It's just, if there's a target, you identify them, you kill them. I don't know if I believe that there are any moderates worth a damn in Hamas. Certainly after October the 7th, I'm not convinced there's any such thing as a good apple in the organisation. The only good apple in Hamas, as it seems to be, is Mosab, who defected and reformed. And he was the great exception to the rule.
And now Yahya Sinwar.
What is his?
He's a great exception to the rule that Cenk seems to vilify as a sellout for it. So, strange kind of, ridiculous kind of, damned if you do, damned if you don't catch-22 is determined to paint there, it seems.
And now Yahya
Sinwar.
Sinwar.
What does Israel get out of that, tactically or strategically?
We have to acknowledge the geopolitical circumstance as it stands today. Netanyahu is deeply unpopular in Israel, will almost certainly lose an election if it's called right now. He knows that. Everyone is aware of that. That is why a lot of Israelis are frustrated with Netanyahu for not getting the hostages back home for his own political ambitions. So the only way that the election would be called now is if the far right-wing Ben Gvir and Smotrich pull out of the government. The only way that they would pull out of the government is if there's a ceasefire. And they have said that very clearly on the record. They have said if there's a ceasefire, we're going to end this government and Netanyahu will lose probably this time forever. So Netanyahu has every incentive to kill the moderates inside Hamas so that the extremists take over. And he goes, oh, well, golly, gee, now I double can't get to a peace deal.
Okay, let me...
Right. Funny thing about kind of conspiracy theories like this, or, it seems to be this is what the left does to try and paint itself as more well knowledged. It's kind of, if someone suggests and to a degree, I mean, look, the pro-Israel side kind of do this as well. They'll echo each other's justifications for their stance. They'll echo each other's kind of pointing out of nuances, because I mean, ultimately, that's sometimes, in a complicated situation, someone finds the nuances for you. But and then the left's kind of pathological attempt, determination to make it not about October the 7th and not about the horror of what Hamas did. They've focused entirely on the Israeli right-wing government, Israeli politics. This is what's compelling him. There's no acknowledgement of what has to drive this war to its end, is the nature of Hamas as an enemy and the need to resolve them, the need to defeat them for good. And I mean, as things stand, I think maybe Benjamin Netanyahu might actually gain some good approval ratings. I mean, I actually have, for all that he's been painted as the far right figure we're supposed to despise, I've actually come to admire him a lot in this war. He's shown incredible resilience and determination in this war. He's proven himself to be a very a brilliant wartime leader. He has kind of proven himself to be a modern Churchill, maybe even better than Churchill, who refused to cave to international pressure and refused to cave against the adversity he's faced. I think it's a shame he's probably going to go to jail for corruption charges when this is over, but I have a lot of respect for him. I've gained a lot of respect for him in this war, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the Israeli population have as well. There's this whole thing of we're so convinced we accumulate so many kind of talking points that we suddenly think we're experts on what's really going on in the war, and the real cynical motivations behind it. There can't possibly be that it's literally existential for Israel to fight this war. It's just the left just seem to refuse to acknowledge that. But that's the left who kind of don't acknowledge that it's existential, but there's a demonic side of the left that does acknowledge it's existential for Israel and delights in the fact that it's existential and delights in the thought, oh, this could be the end of Israel, the end of that hellish Satan spawn state. I will party when it happens. Just the really demonic kind of.
And I am 100% 10 toes down anti-Israel. I believe Israel has no right to exist. I believe the United States has no right to exist. I believe every settler colony who has committed genocide against native peoples, against indigenous people, has no right to exist. I believe in a free Palestine, from the river to the sea.
They're basically just warmongers on only the warmongers for the enemies of the West.
I take the question also to you, Mosab, about Sinwar taking over. Does that change the calculation in any way for you?
Look, there is no difference between Sinwar and Haniya. They are both complicit in the crime. Both of them have blood on their hands. Both of them sacrificed children as a strategy to gain power. And they couldn't be more careless about the future of the Palestinian children. And I think both leaders must be brought to justice. And if it's not possible, and there is no way around it, then killing them is a virtue. Killing them, in fact, is a day of celebration, because we know that heads of evil are being removed from power. Now, for those who dare to question Israel without addressing this evil practice of sacrificing children done by Haniya and Sinwar and all the Palestinian ideologists throughout the century, by the way, if they haven't already condemned this culture that targets children and put them in harm's way, then they don't have the authority to question what Israel is doing. If they want to question what Israel is doing, they first must address this evil practice. Otherwise, they are hypocrites and they just pose as they are standing on a high moral ground, and they have the authority to question people and label this person this and that person that. This is not how it works. If you want to be truthful, then you have to be truthful all the way.
All right, we're going to take a break. I just want to say to those of you who are listening, there are many, many more debates that we've got on our website. Not all of them reach this level of intensity, but some of them do. But all of them end up shedding light, as I feel this one is as well. Recent topics we've taken on include: should Biden step down? Is wokeness killing comedy? Is the two-state solution still viable? All of that and more is at opentodebate.org. This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan. The question we're taking on: can Israel make peace with Hamas? Our guests are Cenk Uygur and Mosab Hassan Yousef. Let me say that again, and Mosab Hassan Yousef. What we like to do in our debates at this point is ask for people who are experts in the topic or following the topic to also submit questions that I'll read to you, and some of them have given a lot of thought to these. The first one I want to bring in it comes from Nicole Naraya, who is a senior politics reporter at Vox, who has covered the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict extensively and helped lead the organization's coverage of the Gaza war. Her question is this: the kind of regional escalation many experts warned of is now here. In the wake of the recent assassinations of top Hamas and Hezbollah leaders, Hezbollah and its Iranian allies are expected to retaliate harshly. The U.S. is moving military assets to the Middle East in preparation. Full-scale war appears possible. Will that force Israel to turn its attention away from Hamas in Gaza, if only because it faces a more pressing threat along its northern border with Lebanon? To what extent might that force Netanyahu's hand in accepting a Gaza ceasefire deal and shift Israeli public opinion on continuing the war in Gaza?
Right, just quickly. I really hate this line about, that Israel hitting Hezbollah has kind of escalated the conflict with Lebanon. Lebanon began its rocket fire on Israel on October the 8th. Immediately after the October the 7th attacks, it began bombarding the north with rockets, and it's been barely covered in the news at all. I was utterly sickened the other day when James O'Brien said that when, talked about the fact that, now that Israel's turning its attention to Lebanon, it's as though Gaza didn't satisfy Israel's bloodlust.
Well, it's 20,000 now. Will 30,000 be too many? And this, to my mind, utterly spurious notion that you're going to eradicate Hamas or get the hostages released by killing tens of thousands of civilians. And when perhaps the bloodlust was no longer being satisfied by what was going on in Gaza, they turn their attention to Lebanon and start killing civilians there.
It's like, that is sickening. You should be fucking ashamed of yourself, James O'Brien, for spreading a blood libel like that, when you should know damn well, and you know damn well, that Lebanon, that Hezbollah started this war with Israel.
And first of all, to go back to this claim that Hezbollah never started this war, from the 8th of October, started launching, by this point, over 11,000 rockets into Israel. 96,000 people in northern Israel have been displaced. 10% of Israel's landmass has been depopulated, 11 months deep. What is it exactly that you expect Israel to do? At this point, civilians are out of their homes, children are out of their schools. What do you expect Israel to do in the final instance where there is a precision strike on Hezbollah terrorists, Hezbollah terrorists. The world wants to claim that this is an international war crime. Like, what should Israel do? Just bend over and keep accepting it? None of these things are acceptable to you people. Targeted strikes, unacceptable. Pages, unacceptable. What is acceptable to stop these terrorists from persistently and belligerently attacking Israel? And to make the claim, first of all, that they are doing this on behalf of the Palestinians is absolutely outrageous. You want to say that, oh, we're fighting for the Palestinians because of the occupation in this oppressive military state. What about Hezbollah's oppressive military state? What about Hezbollah's state within a state that has undermined Lebanon's sovereignty? What about the fact that Hezbollah goes to Syria and massacres people on behalf of Assad? What about the fact that Hezbollah goes to Iran and massacres, rapes innocent Iranians? So why don't we just say that everything that Israel's doing is in behalf of the innocent Iranians, the innocent Syrians, and the innocent Lebanese? You know why you don't say that? Because it sounds absolutely ridiculous.
In fact, Lebanon has been bombarding the north heavily, and at one point, Lebanon actually... there's one incident in which Lebanon missiles hit a playground in the north of Israel that killed 12 Druze children. And the activists who kind of complain about baby killers were silent. They weren't saying, Hezbollah are baby killers. Only Israel are the baby killers and all this, the child killers. Israel has to retaliate to that. It was right to retaliate to that. It's been Biden that's kind of, talked them into not responding. And just to trust that the Iron Dome will keep protecting the north from Hezbollah. But, the Iron Dome, even the Iron Dome has been hit. To the delight of the anti-Israel activists, the sick demons on Twitter. The fucking nightmare creatures on Twitter.
Y'all are the demons. Y'all are the villains. We've been trying to end y'all. Get free of y'all.
Disgusting people. But the point is, this isn't something... Israel has not escalated the conflict with Lebanon. Hezbollah has been, goading this on for nearly a year before Israel finally struck back on Lebanon. Rightly so.
Would you like to take that first?
Sure. Nothing's going to force Netanyahu to take a ceasefire deal, because if he does, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich leave the government. He loses power. He doesn't care about the Israeli people. He obviously doesn't care about the hostages. My God, he has no concern at all for the Palestinians or the giant war he's trying to start in the Middle East. He has no concern for the Americans who have to pay for it in both blood and treasure.
Oh, fuck you, Cenk. What war is he trying to start? Hamas started the war. Hezbollah started this war. Iran started this war. Fuck you. Disingenuous fat prick.
Blood and treasure for the wars he's starting. All he cares about is me, me, me. And that's why 72% of Israelis say that he should leave, and he's deeply unpopular. And so that's why I say never say that all Israelis are this way or that way. Like any nation, there's great variety. And right now, like a lot of nations, like we did not like Dick Cheney and George Bush when they executed the Iraq War. A lot of Israelis don't like Netanyahu. Is he agitating for more war? Of course. He bombed Tehran, Beirut, and Damascus. How much more of a warmonger can you be?
Iran attacked mainland Israel in April. They planned the October the 7th terror attacks with Hamas. They backed Hamas. And they backed Hezbollah in its attacks on Israel as well. Israel didn't start any of these wars, you fucking moron.
So, you talk about sacrificing children. I keep saying I can't stand that 34 kids were killed in Israel. I can't stand that over 15,000 kids have been killed in the Palestinian areas. But how could you possibly say, can you believe Hamas killed those kids? But you won't say, can you believe Netanyahu killed the Palestinian kids? So many more, a stadium full of kids. Isn't that enough? Is anything ever enough? No. It's all Hamas's fault. They made us kill them. They made us do this.
Is it enough for Hamas? That's the question. Is Hamas ever going to look at the death toll of children and say, okay, it's time to surrender for the sake of our people's survival and well-being? No one ever asks that question. And it's Hamas that has more power to end this war than anyone else. They could surrender now, and this war would be over. And the killing would stop. The war would stop. But Hamas have chosen to keep the war going. I mean, if they surrendered, then there is no way that Israel could justify keeping the war going. America would be forced to intervene to say, okay, stop now. You've got no imperative to wage this war anymore. You've defeated Hamas. We're not going to support this war anymore. But no, Hamas keep the war going. And in terms of, the children who've been killed, it's as James Valiant of the Ayn Rand Institute said this. It's like we can't parent all the world's children, and it should be down to the parents of the Palestinian kids to have protected them. And one way to have protected them was to have never voted Hamas into power. Would be to be mindful of the kind of government you want ruling your country, and whether they're going to be good for your children's long-term future, or whether they're going to get your children killed in pointless wars with Israel. And yet they voted Hamas anyway. And if they make that choice, we can't parent their kids on their behalf if that's the decision they're going to make.
Nope. It's all Hamas's fault. They made us kill them. They made us do this. We're never going to get to peace with them because they're the violent ones. Well, when you kill 35 times as many civilians as they did, you don't get to say that they're the violent ones because you're 30 times as violent.
Yes, you do. I speak to a lot of Israelis on Twitter. I mean, ever since October the 7th, I've got to know a lot of Israelis. So I've built more and more of a personal stake in what's happening in Israel over the course of this year than I ever would have before. I've got to know the humour of the Israelis, the wit of the Israelis, the art and spirit of the Israelis. And even the most kind of, even the most jingoistic, patriotic of Israelis would say that when it came to the death of that little girl, Hind Rajab, in what I've always referred to as, what I can only refer to as a fog of war scenario, where we don't know what actually happened, but it was terrible. Because there is not a single Israeli I know who doesn't describe the death of little Hind Rajab as anything other than a heartbreaking tragedy. There's not a single Israeli I know who would have wanted her death to have happened for the world. But it did happen. This idea there's a kind of equivalence between an Israeli population who know that this war has been made inevitable by Hamas and it has to be fought, and Hamas who just delight in all the death, and a left-wing ideologues who seem to be entirely behind Hamas and that sick genocidal insanity, who've had a taste of blood. Drawing false equivalence between that is just ridiculous.
I'm never going to hold that against the Israeli people. I just want to get the peace so we can have two beautiful nations. We've got to get there, and the way to get there is not more war, it's more peace.
Two beautiful nations. At best, a Palestinian state would have been a I guess the best it would have been was Jordan, like Jordan, a kind of a monarchy with but still practices kind of pretty repressive Islamic law, Sharia law, or a dictatorship like Egypt, or a theocracy like Saudi Arabia or Iran. Would Palestine ever become a beautiful nation? I mean, there's a signs of a beautiful culture in Palestine, beautiful art and creativity, but I don't think it ever would have become a desirable state, if you know what I mean. In the same way that hardly any states in the Middle East are desirable at all. So let's be clear on this. This hypothetical utopian Palestinian state would never be what it's painted as, even if it wasn't for Hamas.
Well, when you kill 35 times as many civilians as they did, you don't get to say that they're the violent ones because you're 30 times as violent. But I'm never going to hold that against the Israeli people. I just want to get the peace so we can have two beautiful nations. We've got to get there, and the way to get there is not more war, it's more peace.
Do you want me to repeat the question, or do you want to respond to Cenk's response?
Well, I think you're just a hypocrite.
Okay, now you're getting personal.
And I think, yes, I am personal.
Well, let's not call each other hypocrites or other names, okay?
You have children.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to choose between your two children and other people's children, what do you choose? If you had no choice,
but you do have a choice. You have no choice but to murder 15,000 kids.
Their children or your children. What would you choose?
I'm stepping in again because we're
getting
to very rhetorically obvious questions that are not helping people understand the issue that
because he cannot answer this question, because if it comes to him and his family, then it's a different business.
So you would kill 15,000 other kids just to save your kids.
Let's cool it, please.
I don't have children.
Say you would.
This is a question to you. What would you do?
Shall we cut the mics?
I would not kill a school full of children.
Let's stop.
If you had to choose between your children and the rest of the world, what do you choose?
Mosab, please stop. Take this question, please. It comes from Barbara Slavin, who is a distinct...
No, Mosab's question is entirely valid. It's Cenk as being the objectivist, superior objectivist, and thinking, with no clue the existential plight that Israel's before. He scoffs at the idea that it's an existential plight even. But he doesn't scoff at the idea that it's an existential plight for the Palestinians for some reason. And it could indeed be if Israel were a far more ruthless power than it is. But, okay. But Israel, he just does not buy the idea that, a state like Israel has to practice a certain degree of exceptionalism, of first duty of the state is to protect our own people from an existential threat like Hamas. And it has to be done quickly, especially now that the international community is bearing down on Israel. The idea that this is supposed to kind of restrain Israel, in this circumstance it's not going to. It's actually going to make Israel rush the job to get it done quickly before the international community can stop them. It's actually pushing Israel to a corner where it's got nothing to lose. And it's going to be much more ferocious in its fight, and much more rash in its fight, because it now has to rush the operation because of the insane interference of the international community. Just baffles me that the international community could be that petty and that just destructive out of its own pieties, its own hypocritical pieties, and petty UN vendettas, petty vendettas of the UN. But it has to be done quickly, and October the 7th proves you've got to take the terrorists out. You've got to win this war quickly, so that an October the 7th can never happen again, and so that the rocket fire can never, kill your people again. So it is existential. It is a question of, it's your children or theirs. Because Hamas insists on keeping the human, the keeping the children in harm's way. So does Egypt. Egypt insists on keeping the Palestinians in the line of fire, in that war zone, by refusing to let a single Palestinian leave.
They have no love for the Palestinian peoples. None. If they had any, the Jordanians would have taken in the West Bank Palestinians, the Egyptians would have taken in the territory they used to run, the Gaza, and own the Gaza, and they would have taken in the Palestinians from the Gaza. Why have the Egyptians made sure that not one Palestinian is allowed to leave Gaza? Why do they make sure that their border wall is tough as anything?
So no, it's a legitimate question. And Cheng just scoffs at the idea. Cheng just scoffs at the idea it's that existential for Israel, but it is.
Take this question, please. It comes from Barbara Slavin, who is a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. She's debated with us twice at Open to Debate. Her question is, if Hamas were to accept Israel's right to exist in internationally recognized borders and forswears continuing violence, would Israel then accept Hamas as part of a Palestinian unity government? And I want to ask this question in the framework of my own experience. I covered Israel, I covered the PLO in the 1980s and the 1990s. I saw the PLO come a long way, and Israel come a long way, at the time when Yitzhak Rabin was the prime minister and Yasser Arafat was the chairman of the PLO, from a time when they were talking as they are now, that it would be just impossible for them to make peace because of the legacy of pain each had inflicted on one another. It did seem totally impossible that they could ever find a way to talk to each other. I granted there was not the religious dimension to this. It was more nationalism, as you said earlier. But having witnessed this movement from the totally not possible to the for a while possible solution reminds me of this question. If Hamas were to come to a point of accepting Israel's right to exist and forswear violence, could Israel at the same time include Hamas? Or is there too much blood already spilled to make something like that possible?
Well, I mean, to echo what Mosab said earlier, Arafat was a con man. He agreed to the peace accords, but he was saying privately, he was quoted as saying privately to the Palestinians, this is just a stall for time. We are still committed to the eradication of Israel. So, there was no real, he didn't enter the peace talks with any genuine sincerity. But Hamas just, to my mind, just seemed impossible, beyond reform. They're just an irredeemable cult, really. Now, Mosab himself is evidence that it's possible to leave that cult and to be de-radicalized. But he's an exception to the rule, really.
Whatever Hamas says today, whatever they do is too late. They had the opportunity for 36 years to recognize Israel's right to exist, and Israel tried many times to negotiate with Hamas. And the condition was very clear, that you drop your violence, and then after that we are able to sit on the negotiating table. But Hamas refused to accept Israel's right to exist in principle. So if Hamas comes today, after October 7, after destroying Gaza, after using Gazans as human shields, this is a crime. Even if Israel forgives this crime, I will never forgive Hamas for killing and sacrificing Gaza children for their political gain.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter whether Israel or the international community would validate Hamas and reward them with anything. I will always oppose Hamas. I will never forget what they did to the Arab and Jewish children in the region.
So I want to take a piece of that response back to you, Cenk, but I have one request. I feel you might be getting more airtime than your opponent, and so I want to ask you to be a little bit more terse, because in matter of fairness, fundamentally, Mosab said, in the case of Hamas, it's too late. They've been given the chance over and over again, chance to be flexible. They've shown no flexibility. Very recently, they showed the opposite of flexibility. In the case of Hamas, it's too late.
Yeah, so again, I'm sorry, but nonsense. Number one, Hamas has accepted the ceasefire, Israel hasn't. So Israel has killed way more than Hamas has. So under that logic, again, we can never talk to Israel. What an absurd way to think. Second of all,
absurd is one of those trigger words that is sounding a little bit personal.
Okay, but I mean, I don't know what you, like, how do I address the fact that you say, okay, I don't want to negotiate with my enemies. I'd like to negotiate with what? Puff the Magic Dragon? Norway? Well, who are we negotiating with if we're not negotiating with our enemies? And this idea that, they're uniquely crazy.
But I think...
Hold on, I got to say this. So oh my God, they hate us for who we are. The Greeks and the Armenians hated the Turks, hated us. And I don't blame them. We occupied them. Of course they hated us. What were they going to do? Love us? And then, you know what they did? They rebelled against the Ottoman Empire and said, you have no right to exist. Well, it's true. The Ottoman Empire didn't necessarily have to exist. But if we could have said, how dare you? You're saying we don't have a right to exist and you hate us. We're going to occupy you forever.
I'm cognizant of the time again. So, yeah, please do.
Okay. Hamas on October 7 committed a genocide against the Jewish people. Then immediately took hostages to force Israel to declare defeat and surrender on October 8th. This is Hamas' strategy. Because they knew when they take hostages, Israel would have no choice but to come to the negotiating table broken and give Hamas recognition as a counterpart. This is why they took the hostages. And today, we have all the hypocrites around the world saying ceasefire now. They don't understand that by doing so, they are giving Hamas victory and they are forcing Israel to declare defeat. And this is the most dangerous thing that is happening about ceasefire. It's not a war that Israel chooses to do. Israel is trying to end the war that Hamas started. And when we force Israel, it's Israel's choice, actually, to decide to sit on the negotiating table or not. It's not up to him. It's not up to anyone else to actually force Israel to stop their war, to end a radical, savage group and give them legitimacy and give them, keep them in power. So with that said, it's not up to anyone to force Israel to sit on the negotiating table. If the harm was against him, his people, or his own children, he wouldn't negotiate.
I just told you I would.
Over the life of your children?
I want to bring in an Israeli voice to this conversation in the form of a question from Einat Wilf. Einat is a former member of the Israeli Knesset and actually debated with us in the past as well. And I'll take this question to you, Cenk, because it echoes very much what Mosab is saying. She asks, given that Hamas remains deeply and violently committed to the fundamental Palestinian ethos of no sovereign state for the Jewish people in any part of the land, manifested in the declared demand to exercise a non-existent right to settle inside Israel's sovereign territory in the name of return, what exactly makes you think there is room for a negotiated agreement, assuming that Israel's own red line is to maintain and protect its very existence as the sovereign state of the Jewish people? And you have already stipulated that you are a supporter of the existence of Israel, so that's not the challenge here. The question is, why would they want to negotiate for that when she feels that that is fundamentally at risk?
Yeah, this is the same arguments they always make. Why should we negotiate? Oh, those guys are evil, uniquely evil. We kill way more than them. We've occupied them for 57 years. We've oppressed them for 57 years. But they're uniquely evil. And by the way, let's acknowledge the huge amount of racism in that. The Muslims and the Arabs and the Palestinians are unique savages. They're not part of civilization, as Netanyahu said in the speech to Congress.
Oh, for God's sake. October the 7th was uniquely evil. And it just seems crass that he's belittling that view. It's like, if you really were horrified about October 7th, you would know that October the 7th was uniquely evil and its perpetrators were uniquely evil. I mean, that's what changed the entire game for me. Prior to then, I would have been open to the conceit that maybe Israel and Hamas were as bad as each other. And it's October the 7th that woke me up to the fact that they're not as bad as each other. Only one side in this is evil, and it's Hamas. Hamas isn't simply as bad as Israel. October the 7th proved to me that Hamas isn't simply as bad as Israel. It proved to me that Hamas are evil. And also this thing about this racism. Einat Wilf is well studied. She based her research on the Palestinian kind of the cause based on what they've actually said, and the years working on lobbying for a peace deal that she thought the Palestinians wanted. And the more she looked into it, the more she realised, and the more that the efforts did not bear fruit, and certainly didn't bear fruit in Gaza in 2005.
And this was really the decade of the land for peace. Not only have we made peace with Egypt based on this formula, we were now negotiating with Syria over the Golan Heights, and we signed another peace agreement with Jordan when Jordan gave up its territorial claim to the West Bank. And then we negotiated directly with the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, over the future of the West Bank and Gaza. And like many Israelis, I followed with so much excitement and joy when Ehud Barak goes to Camp David. And Camp David is already symbolic. This is when peace was negotiated with Egypt over kind of land for peace. So Ehud Barak puts this proposal on the table. People forget by now how audacious and far-reaching it was. For the Palestinians to have a fully sovereign state in the West Bank, in Gaza, end of the occupation, the Israeli military retreats. There were going to be no settlements in that state. Settlements were going to be dismantled or exchanged for equivalent land. The capital was going to be in Jerusalem, including holy sites in East Jerusalem. Essentially, check, check, check. All that the Palestinians had to do was say, yes. And Arafat walks away. And he walks away, and not only does he walk away to no criticism from his people. There's not even a single Palestinian writing an op-ed in a British paper saying, are you nuts? Go back to that negotiating room and get us the state for which we've been fighting, that we've been longing for so long. So he walks away. He's not criticized for walking away. He was actually criticized heavily for daring to negotiate, but not for walking away. And what follows is this massive campaign of violence that before October 7th was the darkest time to live in Israel.
For decade after decade, people like them have supported the worst possible elements and have encouraged them in this delusion that Israel can be disappeared. It's not going to be disappeared. And yet this delusion is encouraged, among other things, among some people in the Palestinian leadership, which is why when they're offered 99% of a state, as they have been time and time again, they say no, because 99% isn't 100%.
Well, that clip I found of Bill Clinton from a few years ago was very telling, both in his description of what Hamas do, which they're now doing, and also in the fact that he had a great settlement there, and Arafat at the last minute screwed him, just walked away.
Absolutely. Arafat walked away as his predecessors had walked away time and again. It could all be so different, you know, it could all be so different. Just going back to what's happened in Gaza since the withdrawal, you know, remember the Israelis left Gaza in 2005. It was extremely traumatic for the people of Israel because they saw members of their own army pulling forcibly Jewish families from their homes because they said that they would give Gaza over to the Palestinians. There were elections. Hamas won the elections, killed their Fatah rivals, and then never had another election. How can anyone defend this group or believe they're a legitimate government of Palestine?
That's the moment when I began to ask a very simple question. What do the Palestinians want? Because they clearly don't want an independent state. They clearly don't care about the settlements. They clearly don't care about a capital in East Jerusalem because they could have just had all of it, and they walked away from it.
The more she it's basically, it's like he just has this anti-intellectual conceit that, you know, if you've studied and come to this conclusion I don't like, then it's because you're a racist, not because the facts have proven you right. It's just I won't accept the facts. If the facts point to a conclusion I deem racist, I just won't accept the facts. You know, the facts have to be politically correct for me. It's frustrating.
So you can't trust these people. They're naturally violent.
Well, you certainly couldn't trust the Palestinians who attacked on October the 7th. In fact, the reason they were able to attack those communities in such a devastating way was because some of those communities had taken Gazans into their trust. You know, Gazan workers who kind of commuted from Gaza to Israel, and you know, some of these kibbutz communes, left-wing communes who believed in coexistence, took some of these Gazan workers into their trust and wanted to work on a commune based on the idea of peaceful coexistence, and having a cooperative commune.
You can see it literally on the signs they have on their fridges and their fridge doors in what remains of their houses. Peace signs, calls for peace. I think that this is so important to realize. And one other thing, many of the Hamas fighters, terrorists, who were found dead or captured alive after that day, were found to have plans on them which had extraordinarily detailed issues about who lived in which house. There are stories there's one kibbutz where the man who was in charge of security in the kibbutz, the terrorists went to his house first and killed him and his family, and then went door to door elsewhere. How did they have all of this knowledge, literally family by family, door to door? It was because some of the people they had given their trust to had sold them out, had given information over to Hamas to get them killed. Now that is going to have in Israel a seismic effect in the years ahead. Anyone who thinks that what we heard from Jeremy Corbyn and Len McCluskey is remotely possible is living in a different century to the one we're now in.
And it was those Gazans they'd taken into their trust who gave the information to Hamas that allowed them to make their strategic attack on their communities on October the 7th, knowing which guy in the community did the security and so which house to attack first. So, again, this whole thing, if you don't trust, people who will do that, then it's a racism or something. No, it's proven that you can't trust them.
They say as they drop 2,000-pound bombs on their children. So I don't think either side is naturally violent. That's racist, anti-Semitic, bigoted. It's absurd. You get to peace through negotiation. So according to her logic, okay, the African National Congress used to do violence in apartheid South Africa. Well, that's it. These brutish savages and like Nelson Mandela, you can never get to peace with them. Well, it turns out you could get to peace with them if you tried. They didn't want to get to peace with them until there was economic consequences, and that was because of the boycotts. We should do the same exact thing to Israel. America should cut off all funding. We're supporting a brutal occupation, the giant oppression of 5.5 million people, the deaths of 40,000 people, and then they turn around and claim the Palestinians are violent? It's disgusting, it's offensive, and it's counter-rational. Right. It's not even close to rational.
I'm cutting in because you've made that point before. I just want to let
Have you ever been to Gaza?
Apartheid South Africa was able to change its practices through economic consequences. Israel cannot change the situation. It can't end the occupation. I mean, this talk of ending the occupation. You end an occupation when the country you are occupying is no longer presents a belligerent future enemy. You don't end it when they're still threatening to kill you, or when they still have kind of a strategic advantage with which to attack you. The Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, I've been horrified by. I've just been horrified at how petty and cavalier they've been in this. I mean, there was a great opportunity after October the 7th for the Palestinian leadership to speak out and say our solidarity with your nation as it suffered this tragedy, and for all the wrongs we have, for all our grievances against you in the past. This is, we cannot condone this, and we utterly condemn this. There was the opportunity, and yet the Palestinian Authority still wanted to make it all about their victimhood. It's pathetic, it's nasty, it blows my mind that, the leaders in the Middle East can be that petty and just disgraceful, really.
If people are occupied, what does international law says? International law says that people who are under occupation have the right to struggle against their occupiers.
No, it doesn't.
No. That's what the UN says. You can't deviate the discussion.
It's a horrible Holocaust that Israel is conducting in Gaza, and it's not defensive.
Because no army can claim it is defensive when it is occupying another people and another country. And it cannot call itself defensive when it is committing and conducting a system of apartheid against another people.
Mr. Barghouti doesn't want a two-state solution because he doesn't want a Jewish state. He wants the river to the sea to be a Palestinian state, ruled by him and his corrupt friends. But secondly, he cannot answer the question I've put to him repeatedly. This is the PA budget. It rewards terrorism. And let me just finish, Mr. Barghouti, since I allowed you that right in the end. This budget not only extends to rewarding the people who carry out acts of terrorism against Jews and the families of people who do, thus incentivizing terror, and that's the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has also now committed to pay salaries to the fighters and the terrorists of Hamas from October the 7th and their families. So tell me, please, Piers, or Mr. Barghouti, where is the good negotiating partner on the Palestinian side here exactly?
So, no, I don't see any encouragement of the idea of ending the occupation, or that, Israel should be pressured to. The occupation exists to pressure, the Palestinian Authority to get its act together and act like a proper government that keeps its terrorist factions under control. And, well, as it happens, the ANC, once they took power, they've proven to be an utterly rotten, nasty, vindictive government that has run the South Africa appallingly, and it's now engaged in lawfare and propaganda interference for Hamas and for Iran against Israel. It is an utterly rotten regime as far as I'm concerned. So, apartheid South Africa is no more, but, I'm not sure that ANC South Africa is any better. Might even in some ways be worse, because now we've got, violent militias who are just attacking and killing white South African farmers. So it's almost worse than the apartheid. So this idea of that we're bankrupting Israel whilst it's in an existential fight, so you're going to cripple its economy while it's facing an existential threat. I think Cenk is a piece of shit for suggesting that. I think everyone is a piece of shit for suggesting that. And again, this is a turnaround opinion for me. I might have actually thought that BDS might have had a point in terms of don't fund countries that are committing human rights abuses, until they change their tune. But Israel is in a fight to the death with regimes that are even far worse human rights abusers, and whose and the end goal of their mission, and the end goal of theirs, is to replace the Israeli state with a absolutely vile, murderous, barbaric caliphate, and completely destabilize the region. And you want me to join the boycott to ensure that Israel falls? Fuck off, frankly.
Put my name on one of their bombs. No, because I would probably be murdered by the IDF.
Why would you be murdered?
They put my name on one of their bombs. They murdered journalists more than all other nations combined
20, 30 years ago, that was also the case. If you've never been there, you don't even know the people. You need to live with the people for at least 10 years to understand who they are before you represent them. You're representing people that you don't know. I was born there, and I don't need to represent their ideology. But at the end of the day, they are Arabs. My mother is an Arab. My father is an Arab. And they are lost cause because they are believing of foreign ideologies. And this is what I'm trying to emancipate my people by asking them to drop their sick ideology so they can be themselves.
Let me come in on that very point. To what extent would you say that the people who live in Gaza and the people who live on the West Bank are supporting Hamas now? And do they, in fact, seek peace with Israel? And I know everybody's different, and it's I'm asking a general question.
Listen,
but in general,
the vast majority of what's so-called Palestinians in the territories, whether in the West Bank or Gaza, the vast majority of the Muslim world have been supporting Hamas. And the reason, not because they know what Hamas is, not because they understand Hamas ideology. The reason, it's because of their anti-Semitic approach, because of their hatred of the Jewish people, and they found their angry cause to launch a global assault against this most productive ethnic group that they have contributed so much to life. And they did not start this war, and they haven't oppressing what so-called Palestinian people. The Palestinian people have been inflicting self-pain for 70 years.
So if Hamas were to be defeated or disappear or something absurd like they resign, the bulk of the Palestinian population would still be at war with Israel or still be willing to be at war with Israel?
Listen, prior to the first Palestinian Intifada, we did not have a problem. There was no one checkpoint. We were able to go and dine in Tel Aviv. The Jewish people were able to come to Ramallah, to Gaza, shop. I have memories of Jewish families coming to our house, and my father was serving them dinner. We did not have a problem. There was no wall. We were able to travel abroad until the moment Yasser Arafat brought his sick ideology and started the Intifada. This is when everything went wrong.
That's not answering my question about, you're talking about the leadership again, and I'm asking about the common
But yeah, I'm
person.
giving you an example that it is possible. Arabs and Jews can get along. Definitely. Okay. Arabs and Jews can get along, but Palestinian ideologists, this is something that does not have any limitations, and it's an anarchy without a moral compass. Nothing can satisfy it.
I have one more question I was going to get to. We won't have time if you want to respond to what was just said instead.
Yeah, so this idea of like this awful ideology. So I can't stand the fundamentalists of all religions. And so I don't like Muslim fundamentalist ideology, Christian or Jewish or Buddhist even. The settlers have a Jewish fundamentalist ideology, that they are the chosen people, that God gave them that land, and they should drive the Palestinians and ethnically cleanse them from those lands. That doesn't mean I'm not going to get to peace with them. That doesn't mean I want to kill them all. That doesn't mean that we should have permanent war. I think they're lunatics, but I also think the fundamentalists of all sides are lunatics. They believe that they're talking to an invisible person, and that invisible person is telling them to kill everyone. So nevertheless, the way to peace is not through killing. It is through settling your disagreements through diplomacy. So look, this idea that they have that the only way we'll ever get to a peace deal is if Hamas is all killed. And by the way, the next group that comes up that resists occupation, all killed, everybody's all killed. And then they have to come and say, we love the Jews and we love Israel. And there's not a single person who resists you, and grovel and grovel and grovel.
I mean, this question, because I have watched documentaries from the early 2000s on life in Gaza during the occupation, and it did lead me to think, what would I do if I lived this, if this is, all I'd known all my life was this violence and this intimidation? What would I do? And when it comes to October the 7th, the only thing I can say is not that.
There was a ceasefire, and it was broken by Hamas on the 7th of October when they killed 1,400 Israelis and kidnapped 240, when they led to scenes like the one you saw there. I can't stress enough that people in the kibbutz, people in these communities, you see even on the remainders of their house, on their fridge magnets, peace now, live and let live. These were people who wanted to live by their Gazan neighbors, and often cooperated, drove people to hospital. There's a funeral today of an 80-year-old woman who drove Palestinian children to hospitals. She was an Israeli. She was killed by Hamas. Her funeral is today. They couldn't identify the body until just a few days ago. She was so badly burned. I can't stress enough, a ceasefire would return to the situation that led to this. People like that man you just saw me interviewing, he said to me at the end of our interview, he said, I'm a leftist. I've always been a leftist. He said, we cannot live beside these people, by which he and all the others mean we cannot live beside Hamas. Hamas has said that they will do this again and again. There is no way anyone can live beside that.
If I was called on to, what should the Palestinians do to resist? Not that. That's the only answer I really have.
And grovel and grovel and grovel.
I don't really think, in fairness, that Mosab is saying.
No, I think that's exactly what he's saying. Give me a standard. Give me a standard. At what point do the Palestinians say, Have we been peaceful enough? There's giant stretches of time where there's
we
no violence.
We saw with the
That's not true. Well, the further you go back into the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict, the more you realise that the violence has predated the 1967 occupation of the West Bank. Before then, there were still Palestinian terrorist militias shooting up buses, school buses, and Israeli kids being killed. Even before the Nakba, this didn't start in 1948. It didn't start with the Nakba. The first shedding of blood, as I'm reading back. When did the first shedding of blood happen? It seemed to start in 1929 with the Hebron massacre, where mobs of Arabs committed a pogrom and raped and murdered God knows how many Jews. And there were Arabs as well who took some of the Jews in and protected them, it's true, but the conflict, the bloodshed, it began before this. And there was pogroms throughout the Middle East, in Iraq and Yemen and Algeria and Morocco. The Jews suffered their Nakba, as I said, before Israel existed as a state. And if it's this face value conceit that the Palestinians have kind of tried their best to be peaceful. And I think some of that stems from the Palestinian Authority has been very Janus about its relations with Israel. It has sometimes cooperated with Israel in kind of rounding up members of Hamas, but it's been two-faced about it at the same time. It's Fatah and Hamas have met up and decided the next bit of kind of theatre. Like I said, Mosab described several instances in the book where Fatah and Hamas discussed how they were going to, for PR reasons, do a PR stunt of provoking a riot at a checkpoint and filming the carnage, ensuring that the carnage got filmed and shown to the world. They've been very Janus, very duplicitous. Briefly, you can just take it at face value. The Palestinians have been trying to be peaceful with Israel. It's bollocks, really. Quite often, these Palestinian attacks involved targeting civilians, targeting children, just killing them, in gunfire.
One thing that we want to make very clear is that never again will there be a return to the situation that existed along our northern border prior to June of 1982. In other words, we will not allow the development of a terrorist infrastructure, be it Shiite or Palestinians. That's of no difference to us, along the border that could endanger the life of our northern border settlements.
It was here in 1974 that Palestinian terrorists carried out an horrific attack which caused the deaths of 20 Israeli children. The target of the attack was the village school. The school still carries protective grills and the scars of gunfire. In the 70s and early 80s, villages like this were subjected to Palestinian rocket fire. The Israeli government decided that bunkers were not enough.
And no country can withstand that. No people can withstand that. No people should withstand that. That's horrifying. But, the question, what can the Palestinian people do? I've always said when it comes to October 7th, not that. That's what I would always say.
Saw with the PLO that they didn't have to grovel and grovel and grovel. There was a quid pro quo. There was recognition.
First, I do not. There's only one peace deal that was offered by Israel that was pretty good. The rest are total mythology. That whole thing about Clinton and Arafat, even our own negotiators said, no, it was a terrible deal that Israel offered. And then they said, oh, we offered a deal. We offered a deal. Okay. Anybody can offer a horrible deal. But I will say in 2008, Ehud Omer actually offered a pretty good deal. I thought Mahmoud Abbas should have taken it. Now, I hate that he didn't take it. Maybe we could have had a Palestinian state there. You have to look at the deals individually. Do they make sense? Are they fair? but they didn't take the deal. That doesn't mean that we should
Okay.
occupy them for the rest of time.
Jen, time on this one.
But
and this is your last word in
at
this
least,
section.
At least he's admitting that at least once in the history of this conflict, that what so-called Palestinians had an opportunity and they missed it. But I tell him the truth, that the Palestinians or the Arabs had so many opportunities. Because back in 1948, when the Jews declared their independence, the Arabs had equal opportunity to declare their independence. But instead of declaring their independence, they declared war against the Jewish people.
It's absurd. I can't.
It is not absurd. It's a fact.
All right. I'm calling a wrap on this round.
Then give me half your house. Give me half your house.
I'm giving.
Give it to
I'm
me.
calling a wrap.
Give it to me.
Come
Give
on,
it to me right
Jen,
now.
Jen, come on.
Give me half your house.
Cool, please, everybody. We're gonna
Whoa,
go to
he didn't accept it. I'm going to take the whole house.
We're gonna go to our closing.
Accept it. I'm going to take the whole house.
We're gonna go to our closing round, and in our closing round, each debater has 2 minutes to make their point one more time. Cenk, you're up first in that. One more time to tell us why you're answering yes to the question: can Israel make peace with Hamas?
Well, 2 points. Firstly, the partition plan was a first for the Palestinian people, well, the Arabs of Palestine, to be allowed their own sovereignty. And if that's what they wanted, if they wanted a Palestinian state, then why did they reject the offer there and then? Why did they reject the sovereignty offered to them there and then? I mean, the terms and conditions of the deal did not involve, being expelled from the land. The terms were supposed to essentially guarantee that that any Arabs who lived, that the governance would be Jewish, but if a substantial number of the population was Arab, they were not to be discriminated against. So no, it wasn't about give me half your house. It was, on paper that was not how it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a peaceful kind of, acceptance of the fact that we were going to have a significant Arab population in Israel. You'd have a government on one side of, you'd have a Jewish government on one side of the Palestinian partition, and an Arab government on the other, and you had the option to move to whichever was more desirable for you, but no one even gave the Jewish leadership a chance, because they preferred war. I mean, Mosab just, seems to be of the view that the problem with the Western liberals, like leftists, like Cenk, is that they have this kind of, their view is that the Palestinians can only be victims, and they can only have rejected all these peace deals because there was something not satisfying about them. Who are we to question what didn't satisfy them? They have the right to self-determination. They have the right to demand better, whatever would please them. And Mosab sees through that. He sees through the Palestinian leadership's game and their skewed priorities that seem to not favour what was best for the people, what was best for their people, and what was best for saving lives, really.
Yes. So first of all, the only way that you're going to get to a safe haven for Jews, which is what I want, I have Jewish family, I have Jewish friends, is to make a peace deal. Permanent war is never going to get you the dream of Israel. And by the way, of course, in a negotiation, the Palestinians have to give up things as well, including right of return. So if you're a Palestinian, that breaks your heart. I love you, but you've got to compromise. Both sides have to compromise. Has this been done before? Not only has it been done throughout history, thousands of times, Israel did it with Egypt, and they got a great result. They did it with Jordan. They got a great result. So why wouldn't you do the thing that worked instead of something that hasn't worked in 57 years, that hasn't worked in 70 years? The constant occupation. What do you think people that are occupied are going to do? Do you think they're just going to accept it and go, yes, we will be occupied forever. We will never ever resist you? Of course they're going to fight back. As a Turk, I know this. The Greeks fought back. They had every right to fight back. The Armenians fought back. They had every right to fight back. They thought we shouldn't exist. They hated us. Why did they hate us? Not because we're Turks. We could have gone with that excuse. No, they hated us because we were occupying them. That's so obvious. The only way that you don't see it is if you're blinded by rage and cultural bias.
Or you should actually listen to the phone calls that Hamas members made to the family back home bragging about the Jews they killed. Then you know that it is anti-Semitism. Pure and simple.
يابا افتح الوقت شوف كيف قتلت يابا افتح بتدافع عليك وقت قول له وين بروح ربنا معك بالسلامة يابا يابا بالحين يابا والله 10 قتلت.
It's indoctrinated, insane anti-Semitism. One other point I wanted to make is that he says, can you occupy these people forever? But like I said, you occupy a land because in order to stabilize the country, the reason why it took so long to end the Iraqi occupation was because it was felt that it was necessary to remain in place to try and stabilize the situation. Same in Afghanistan, the belief that it was necessary to stabilize Afghanistan. The left will always kind of point to what was going wrong with Afghanistan and Iraq as it's our fault for being there, we should just pull out right away. But it doesn't work that way. It's like, pulling out a knife. You can actually do more damage pulling it out than keeping it, staying put, if you know what I mean. And the point of an occupation, in the case of Palestine, or in the case of Nazi Germany, was to rehabilitate the country into a non-belligerent. But Palestine has refused. The Palestinian territories, Palestinian people have refused to be rehabilitated into a non-threat, and neither has the leadership. It's the leadership that seems to want perpetual occupation because it means victim points, it means sympathy at the UN, and it means fame for themselves as they kind of live off the aid money, and it means keeping the hatred of Israel alive, and it means also deflecting from their failures as a leadership to point the finger at Israel as the source of all of Palestine's woes. Palestinian leadership seem to want a situation where the occupation is permanent. Well, actually, they want to destroy Israel. They want Israel to be dismantled, but they want the end of Israel. But Israel can't allow that, so it has to keep its guard up. He has to maintain the occupation. October the 7th vindicates why there is an occupation, why there is martial law to combat head-on the jihadist terrorist elements in the Palestinian territories. It showed, that if you ended the martial law in the West Bank, you would get more October the 7th from the Hamas terrorists there. And the Palestinian Authority wouldn't dare stop them. Wouldn't care to.
I'm trying to snap you out of it because I've seen it with my Turkish relatives, and I've seen it in every ethnicity. It isn't about Jews or Muslims. When you get dug into a position, you think the other side is so evil, you can't even talk to them. But if you do that, then you're never going to get the thing that you want most of all, which is a safe haven for Jews and a beautiful, loving Israel and a beautiful, loving Palestine. You get there through peace. You will literally never get there through war.
Odd that he talks about, the need to see the humanity in the other side and to work with them. And yet when Mossad did that with the Israeli Secret Service, when he did that with Israel, Chen calls him a sellout for it.
And by the way, you will be the most hated nation on earth because you're going to say, no, my only other option is I occupy them and oppress them for the rest of time. Why would you want to be one of the most hated nations on earth? Give them the freedom that you got. Let them get the state just like Israel did, and let's have peace together.
And Mosab, you get the last word. Your closing, please.
Wow. The entire foundation of this conflict is based on a false narrative, and the false narrative begins with Palestine. The most important question of this century, of our time, that we need to answer, everyone needs to answer. What is Palestine? We need to find out where did that originate from, and the Palestinian ideology, what it really means, what can satisfy it. And if the Arabs have been hijacked by the what's so-called Palestinian cause, the moment we are able to find the origins of this conflict, then we will find the answers. I don't think Israel has a problem with the Arabs as an ethnic group. I think Arabs, Jews, Persians in the region, then they can get along. The Jewish people can get along in every country. We have them all over the world. They are non-violent people, and they are very creative, contributing to life in every field. Now, the Arabs and the Jews can get along because we have a model that is successful in Israel. The Arabs in Israel are a very important part of the state. They are citizens of the state of Israel. They serve in the army. They are part of the social fabric. And this is a living example that Arabs and Jews can get along. But now, the Palestinian ideology, this is delusional. It's a very dangerous, violent ideology that kept developing to a very dangerous state. And today is the time for the world to question this ideology. What do they want? What's their agenda? What's their ultimate goal? Is it to build a Palestinian state, or is it to destroy the state of Israel? If we are able to answer these questions, then we may be able to provide a solution soon, hopefully, for this endless conflict.
Thank you. And that is a wrap on this debate. I want to thank both of our debaters, Cenk Uygur and Mosab Hassan Yousef, for taking part. There's a lot of passion and...
I mean, the biggest misconception I find about Israel is this leftist worldview that it's a white supremacist state. That it's just, Western colonialism at work. Where actually Israel became a sanctuary for Jews throughout the region of the Middle East, and who'd been expelled in their own, who kind of fled from the Arab world, having suffered their own Nakba. And Israel became a refuge for that, and became a refuge for, Jews from Yemen and Iraq who brought parts of Yemenis culture, Iraqi culture with them. I mean, Ofra Hazza was one of the she was one of the most famous pop stars from Israel. And she's released albums, Yemeni songs. I mean, she did kind of 80s updated remix of them, but the original albums, so kind of pure to the Middle Eastern roots and pure to the culture of Yemen. Israel can be a model of the multicultural dream. And there's so much that the left have wrong about Israel. or at least they think they know. They think that because it's been, the state that expelled the Palestinians in its founding, it can't be at the same time the state that provided shelter for the expelled Jews from the rest of it. It can't be a sanctuary for the expelled at the same time. But it can. Israel is full of many beautiful contradictions and beautiful bits of culture.
There was a lot of passion and impassionate speech that passed between the two of you, but the fact that each of you stayed and sat there and listened to each other and made eye contact, I got to say that in itself, in the nature of this conversation, is sometimes more than we're seeing from a lot of other people. So I appreciate what both of you did for doing that. And I want to thank all of you who are tuning into the program, and to let you know that, once again, that we're a nonprofit that is working to combat extreme polarization through civil debate. And our work is made possible by listeners like you, by the Rosencrantz Foundation, and by supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our chairman. Our CEO is Clay O'Connor. Leo Matthau is our Chief Content Officer. Elizabeth Kitzenberg is our Chief Advancement Officer. This episode was produced by Alexis Pangrazia and Marlette Sandoval. Editorial and research by Gabriella Mayer and Andrew Foote. Andrew Lipson and Max Fulton provided production support. The Open to Debate team also includes Eric Gross, Gabrielle Iannicelli, Rachel Kemp, and Linda Lee. Damon Whittemore mixed this episode. Our theme music is by Alex Clement. I'm John Domban. We'll see you next time on Open to Debate.
Okay, enough of that. Now, I suppose this is kind of the point, really, that in terms of faith, Mosab draws a lot of his faith from his newfound Christian faith. He converted from Islam to Christianity whilst he was in the West Bank, and now he kind of denounces Islam as just the real source of the Middle East woes, the Islamism, the toxic ideology of Islamism. He even kind of indicates in his book that if it wasn't for the violent dictates of the Quran, violent dictates of Islam, then he would have probably continued to have a good relationship with his father. He wouldn't have been disowned, and his people wouldn't have gone over completely to the Hamas cult. But there's faith, and then there's moments of disillusionment and reaching a dead end and realizing that his faith is in the idea of the power of faith and forgiveness. That if things can be forgiven, then the bitterness can be got past, and Palestine and Israel could be at peace. But at the moment, Israel and Palestine are locked in this cycle of violence. Palestine remains committed to this tribal commitment to continue to wage war and vengeance against Israel. And as long as that happens, nothing will change. And because that's kind of the theme, is that you accept, okay, well, if that's the case, then the occupation has to go on. That's the only thing that guarantees Israeli security. And then October the 7th happens, and you realise the closest thing to a peaceful status quo that exists, even that unbearable status quo wasn't going to last, and now it's a case of, well, Israel has to go to war now. Israel has to go to war, and there's no escaping war, so it's like another blow to his faith in the hope of peace. So what is the future? And he has to believe that the future, the building for that comes after, but it might just mean going back to the status quo that existed before the Gaza withdrawal. But he is comfortable with that. He has to be, even if the world isn't. Because he knows there are worse things. He's seen them. But anyway, I will follow this up with the next video in which I look at the most recent debate between Cenk and Mosab. And, you know, that's the really juicy one. I'll see you next time.